13th, 2017 is called to order. Welcome to everyone present and to our television viewers. Any item that will be voted on this evening has been posted as this afternoon. Will be posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the board website for replay times. This meeting is being streamed live on our PPS TV services website. So we're...
Is your mic working? Is the mic working?
Is my mic working? It is working?
Oh, okay.
You can... Was that because I'm talking loud, or?
I think it's working.
You can hear?
Yes.
Okay.
Just click done.
Okay. We're here today to consider resolution number 5510. The Mitch Whitehurst case represents a systemic failure to protect students. A new board took office in July, and a new superintendent is joining PPS soon. When the extent of the Whitehurst case became evident, the board as a whole committed that we'd conduct a thorough and independent investigation stretching back the decades that Mitch Whitehurst was a PPS employee at multiple schools across the city. For this investigation, we knew that we wanted to hire a senior and experienced team, and we had some criteria that we were looking for. We wanted the investigators to have the following experience, capabilities, and attributes: deep experience in conducting investigations, preferably ones involving possible claims of inappropriate conduct with children; understanding of the culture of Portland Public Schools, Portland, its policies, procedures, and labor agreements; no prior connection with PPS or PPS personnel that could be construed as causing the investigator to be biased in favor of finding no misconduct by district personnel; and a strong reputation in the Portland community for integrity. Board leadership, working with outside counsel, reviewed many potential candidates and investigators and settled on a team of senior experienced investigators who are familiar with law enforcement and school law and have led investigations into complex cases. One of the things we discussed with investigators that we wanted to have no stone left unturned. We wanted them to follow every lead and get to the bottom of what happened, how it happened, who was involved, and to make a series of recommendations to the board. So today the board will consider a resolution authorizing the following: that the board will approve the engagement of Amy Joseph Peterson with the law firm of Stoll Reeves to supervise the investigation and to retain the following investigators. First person leading the investigation would be Bob Weaver. He's a highly respected partner at the law firm of Garvey, Schubert, and Bearer in Portland. Bob's a former assistant U.S. attorney and was chief of the criminal division there. In both his capacity, in his private capacity and with the U.S. Attorney's Office, he has conducted many complex investigations involving both criminal and civil matters. In addition, Bob would be assisted by his partner, Joy Ellis. Joy would bring 20 years of experience as an employment lawyer as well as experience working with schools. She has broad experience working with all of the state and federal laws that relate to educational institutions. And finally, rounding out the team of investigators is Norm Frink, who's the retired Multnomah County Chief Deputy District Attorney, having served in that capacity for 30 years. It should go without saying that Norm's been responsible for hundreds of investigations, including those involving sex crimes. He has a strong reputation in the Portland community for both being an aggressive but fair prosecutor. So that's the team that we're proposing to be part of the investigation and ultimately to be supervised by external counsel. It's important that this is not just an investigation about what happened or who to hold accountable, but we also have a commitment to the students of Portland Public Schools that our policies, our practices, our actions on every level, whether it's the school board, school building staff, central office staff, our external partners who provide services to our students, that all of those individuals keep our students, especially our most vulnerable ones, safe. We expect from the investigation that there'll be recommendations for changes in both our policies and practices. and to bring forward to the board for consideration and to the district central office staff. I'm going to, in a moment, cover the scope of the investigation, but I wanted to open up the forum to my board colleagues to, maybe I should first ask for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion in a second, before we start discussion. So the resolution number 5510 is been moved by Director Bailey, seconded by Director Constam. So is there any discussion?
I think this investigation is consistent with the work that we have undertaken with our complaint policy to really try to build new systems within this organization that encourage people to bring concerns forward and show the public that this is how we grow and improve as an organization, and that we welcome an airing of concerns and complaints, and particularly in a matter such as this where it has to do with the well-being of children. So I think this is an important piece of that overall work, and I hope and intend that as a board and a district we take the recommendations that come forth from this and really make sure that we have a way of systematically allowing them to inform our ongoing practices, that we address everything that comes forward in this report in a systematic way.
Before Director Moore speaks, I just want to thank her and Director Esparza Brown, who both spent a fair amount of time with me interviewing and reviewing the just various potential investigators before identifying this lineup.
It saddens me that this is one of the first actions that the new board has to take, because it is deeply troubling that we've had a case that has gone on for so long and jeopardized the lives and well-being of so many children. But at the same time, I'm also pretty proud that this is one of the first actions this new board is taking. And I want to thank Julia for really making this happen so quickly. I'm very impressed with the investigative team that we have managed to employ for this. We have been very frank with them about the seriousness with which we take this investigation and the scope of activities, the scope of the investigation that we expect them to conduct, and we expect them to provide us with some really serious recommendations for how we can change our policies, procedures, and practices to make sure that this kind of thing never ever happens again in PPS. As a former child advocate who has spent a good bit of my professional career advocating for children who have been abused, this is probably one of the most important things we can do. So I'm looking forward to getting the results and addressing the issues that produce this lamentable situation.
I would just like to mention that, like Rita, I am very pleased with the people we have been able to recruit to pursue this investigation. And also I would like to thank Julia, because she has been very open, very willing to expand the scope of the investigation in ways that I think are going to be very helpful going forward.
Yeah, thanks to Julie and Rita, and especially Julia. It's important as an organization that we hold ourselves accountable. It's important that we make sure this never happens again.
Any board members have any questions? So I want to just take a moment to just outline, this should be available publicly at some point on our website, but just want to outline the general scope that we've given to the investigators, and ask that it serve as a guide. Notice it's a guide. We expect they bring decades of experience, and we expect them to utilize that experience and expertise. And if they feel that we're looking too broad or too narrow at a particular issue, we'd hope that they would recommend rescoping, so that we really get to the essence of what we're trying to discover here. And we think we've got a great team to make those recommendations. So the critical questions or scope that we've laid out include the following. What notice of possible concerns about Mr. Whitehurst did the district receive? Who received those notices? From whom did they receive them? And when did they receive them? What response did the district make to each notice it received, and what was the timeline for that response? Was each of those responses adequate, and if not, why not? What policies, directives, and procedures were in place at that time that would have been applicable to the complaints or concerns that were raised? Were there systems failures and or employee performance failures, and if so, what were those failures? Were there performance failures by external agents or representatives of Portland Public Schools? Did any PPS employee or employees fail to comply with mandatory reporting requirements or violate any policies, laws, or ethics rules? If so, who and when? Were there any consequences for those failures? Did any of those failures have licensure implications? Is there any evidence that any person or group of people protected Mr. Whitehurst? Who initiated and approved Mr. Whitehurst's transfers? Is there any indication that district personnel used transfers as a way to avoid taking disciplinary action? Was there any follow-up by the administration following settlement of the Rory Thompson matter as directed by the board? And if not, why not? What complaint and investigation procedures should the district adopt to ensure complaints regarding personnel and agents working on behalf of PPS are received and acted upon promptly and appropriately? Do the district's record keeping or other procedures allow for consideration of all prior complaints related to employee misconduct related to students, such that the district can identify any pattern of related issues? If not, what should be done to change that? Are there provisions in the union contract that impact the district's ability to adequately address complaints? Do PPS employees receive adequate training in recognizing possible predatory behavior and how to respond appropriately? Are there other complaints about sexual misconduct by other employees that have not been addressed? So again, this is a outline of a scope, but we anticipate once we have authorized the engagement that there'll be a further conversation with the investigative team on many of these points, and also look to them for recommendations. And I guess before we vote, I'll just say that every parent sends their children to school every day expecting them to be safe. And as a parent who had a child who had Mr. Whitehurst as a teacher, I think that was my expectation. So I know the district can do better and wants to do better. And so I think this investigation and most importantly the recommendations will set PPS on a path so that when parents send their kids to school in the morning, they can feel confident that their kids will be safe, which I think is why we're all here. That and to get a great education. So with that, I'd like to ask for a vote on resolution number 5510.
So I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
So what is the expected budget for this work, and or have we laid out a cap?
So currently we have, as I mentioned, we need to have a further scoping session with the firm. I think right now I'd say 125 to 150, and I think we'll have a better sense once we have more time to talk through the scope. The list, I mean, one of the complications, and I think why this will be a higher cost, is that Mr. Whitehurst was in schools all over our district, and administrators, and other school staff. There's a lot of people who had interactions with him over the past 20 years. So I say the list of individuals who, you know, at some point or time, both within PPS, but also who represented, provided representation to the district is quite long.
And what was the span of years from the first, for the complaints in this incident?
Okay, I'm going to go by memory, but I want to say it's either the late 1990s or the early 2000s. I mean, for sure, I know the Maureen Sloan memo, I think, was 2001.
And what is the anticipated timeline that the?
So great question. We've had quite a discussion about that this morning. There was a sense that they felt that by year's end they could complete it. But I also don't want to be caught in a we're guaranteeing it's going to be done by a certain date, because given what we've asked them to look at, and that we've also said, you know, the question naturally came up of, well, what if we find something else? What we said, and this is being mindful of taxpayers' resources, was, you know, you're not authorized to go open a whole new separate investigation, but we absolutely want you to come to us with it, so we can just determine whether that's appropriate to the scope of this investigation or if it should be dealt with another way. So I think ideally by the year's end, or no later than year's end, we'd have a recommendation, but it also may depend on the complexity and what they find. And I mean, I think we also have to realize that while there's a long list of people that have collectively been identified as potentially people who somehow had some interaction within the system with Mr. Whitehurst, is that, you know, not everybody, there'll be, you know, a variety of reactions to a request to be interviewed.
Mm-hmm. I'm just asking because it's a lot of money at this point. We haven't passed a resolution, but at this point we're not talking about a cap. It's about twice what we spent for the Stolburn report. And I'm assuming that Amy Joseph Peterson is overseeing the scope of this work and monitoring the costs incurred, and not our own general counsel.
Yes, and we, I'm happy to put a cap in to the resolution if people would like that, with the caveat that, you know, depending on the scope, and I think it would be an up to. Obviously, if we can do it for less, I guess the one thing I would say, just vis-a-vis the Stolburn report, I think this is much more complicated. It involves children. It involves people who are dispersed across, you know, different states. I mean, in some ways, if you look at the history, he was more likely to prey on children who didn't have advocates. And I mean, I just think it's a much more difficult investigation potentially. And I would hate to say we did it on the cheap to get the price down. So maybe the best thing to do is we could put a cap and have it be a not more than, with a, we can review progress made, and certainly review the bills on a monthly basis.
I think that would be a good idea. And again, with the ability to review, we don't want to stop short of getting the result that we need. My only concern, and I trust the team that we've assembled here, is that the investigation really has an orientation toward the systemic failures, because in terms of the criminal aspect of this, that has already been settled. In terms of the personal accountability for employees within this district, there are not very many of them who are still employed by this district. Doesn't mean we don't want to look at those pieces, but what we really want to understand was what allowed those repeated complaints to go unheard and unacted upon. And so I just want to make sure that that's really clear in the directive to the investigators.
So I think this is going to be a balance, because I do think, parents in the community are going to want answers. I also believe that we have maybe one or two perspectives of what happened in some of the instances, and I actually think for many of the people involved, there will be there could be findings that there were systemic barriers to people more effectively dealing with,
Yeah.
in this case, an employee who had, basically serial misconduct is what appears. But we were really clear, and that's why I also think that the team approach was to try and identify the policies, practices, and actions that sort of make up our
Mhm.
collective systems, or
It
in this
created the
case-
environment in which this could
Right.
continue. Yeah. I'm good.
We talked about that a great deal in the interviews that we had with the candidates, and I think we were very clear that this is not intended to be a witch hunt. This is not intended to assign blame necessarily. But if there is blame, if there was misconduct or failure to comply with either PPS policy or state law or ethical standards, then we need to know about that. And they have been authorized to pursue that. But the ultimate goal is to come up with an analysis of what factors allowed this situation to persist for as long as it did. And it's somewhere between 20 and 30 years. That's a lot of email to go through. It's a lot of records. It's a lot of interviews. So I want to make sure that, I don't want to burn money, but I also want to make sure that this is a thorough investigation that parents and students can have faith in, that we've fully investigated this, and that we know what this organization needs to do going forward to prevent this from happening again.
Did you want to amend the resolution?
I think it's probably prudent to start with a cap, and it doesn't prevent us
Okay.
from adding to that, should it
amount
be
would you
necessary.
like?
$100,000.
Well, I think. Can we?
Are we gonna horse
Do you wanna-
trade? Are we gonna horse trade here?
Well,
Well,
as I
wait.
say, are you making a formal recommendation? I would ask for 125. Just how about up to, or not to exceed?
Sure.
Okay.
With the understanding that if we have to raise it, then
We have the option to raise.
we have the option to raise it.
Mr. Harris, do you have the resolution in front of you? Yes.
I do now.
Okay. So can I just add a sentence at the end? The contract shall not exceed $125,000. What was the language you wanted?
Maybe the board approves expenditures of up to, but not to exceed 125,000.
That would be fine.
Okay.
I do want to point out one thing to to clarify what's stated here today, I believe that when the board is talking about this item, that they, it not being attorneys, they are referring to alleged incidents, I'm sorry, and possibilities, that nothing has been determined at this point. That's what the purpose of the investigation is for.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Other than his
Very helpful. This is one of the first few times in 20-something years, I think there hasn't been an attorney on the board. So the board approves expenditures not to exceed 125,000. And did you want to add something about? We can just leave it at that, and if we
Or
need
with,
to.
with an
No.
option, with an option to revisit.
Well, that would just be another board action.
Yeah, so just leave it
not
at
to
that. Okay,
exceed
so the
period.
last sentence will now read, the board approves expenditures not to exceed 120,000 in this matter.
That's fine.
Okay? So the board will now vote on resolution number 5510 as amended with
Now,
the,
Do we vote on the amendment first?
okay.
We can just vote on it as amended. It's a,
As amended with the amendment including the names of the investigators, which would be Bob Weaver, Joy Ellis, and Norm Frank.
friendly.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstention? The motion passes. The resolution 5510 passes 5-0. No noes and no abstentions. And that's it. Thanks
Great.
to the board. The meeting is adjourned.